Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Tanchjim Tanya, which hopefully is a name I don't screw up, because I feel like every time I try to remember the name of this thing, I call it the Tanchjim something else. Tanya, Tanchjim, too close together. But that's a pretty small complaint. So what this is, actually, I'll start with this little bit of exposition, right? It's been a long time since I spent much time listening to budget earphones. You've probably noticed over the past 6 months or so, the price of the earphones I've been reviewing has kind of been creeping upward. And it's been a long time since I listened to something that cost under 25 bucks. And that's what we have here with the Tanchjim Tanya. You know, there's been, of course, a lot of, new stuff still coming out in the sub $30 price range, but most of it doesn't really get my interest. But when Tanchjim comes out with something under 30 bucks, that does get my interest, because I've previously reviewed the Tanchjim Hana as well as the Darling, and I really like both of those IMs quite a bit. So I was pretty interested to see what they would do with a $22 IM, which is what this thing costs. It's a single dynamic driver, and you can get it for, I think, $24 with an optional microphone. I've got the version without a microphone because I don't need to talk to my earphones, but yeah, so what I've been doing for the past couple of weeks actually is living with this earphone and comparing it to some other earphones in its price range. And because it's been a while since I've done a sub $30 review, I wanted to actually make this video a little bit more meaningful. So this isn't just going to be a review of the Tanya. I'm also going to give you scores for these two other IMs that I have in the price range, which are the Final E500 as well as the Moondrop Spaceship, which are two IMs I've never reviewed on the channel, but I have had them in my studio for a while now. And I would say these three earphones combined are probably my favorites under around 2,500 bucks or 25 bucks. Wow, that's how much the recent reviews have been increasing in price. But anyway, let's go ahead and dig into the build quality, and then I'll talk about the sound, and then we'll talk about the comparisons of these three different IMs. At the end of it, I'll give it a score, and like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. So if you're watching now live, how's it going? If you have any questions about the Tanya, the Final, or the Moondrop, leave them in the live chat, and at the end of the video review, we'll have a back and forth conversation. We'll spend some time just kind of hanging out. But for now, let's go ahead and dive into the build quality here of the Tanchjim Tanya. Man, I don't know why that one's such a tongue twister for me to say. But anyway, here's the IM, and here is the packaging. Here's what you get inside the packaging. A pretty nice, small, cute box. Again, only $25 or $22 actually. So you shouldn't have super high expectations, but honestly, what they give you is pretty decent for the price. You do get a nice little carrying bag. It's nothing fancy. It's not a hard shell. It's not going to super protect your stuff, but it will hold it all in one place, which I think is a nice inclusion. Of course, you get a set of ear tips, but it's interesting that Tanchjim actually includes two different sets of ear tips. They've got these kind of narrow bore, and then they've got a set of wider bore ear tips. I've just left it with the stock narrow bore, actually. Typically, I'll prefer a wide bore tip, but with these, I left it with the stock ones, and I was pretty happy with that. Potentially, you could get a little bit more trouble out of the wider bores, but not something I dug into too much. And it's also interesting that Tanchjim includes a set of their kind of stick-on filters, which is interesting because a lot of these IMs, right, they'll have filters built into the earphone. And maybe I can show you by taking this thing off, right? There's the filter, and depending on how you wear this thing, how often you clean your ears and stuff like that, those filters can get clogged over time. And I guess here with the Tanchjim, they are removable. You could replace it with one of these. I've never done that myself. I try to avoid getting these things dirty in the first place. But anyway, that's what comes inside the package. Here's, of course, the IM itself. And I think it's worth noting, unlike a lot of the IMs I review on this channel, the cable here on the Tanchjim Tanya is not removable. And that's actually the case for all three of these IMs that we're going to be looking at today. They all have, permanently affixed cables, which for some people is a deal breaker. For me, it's actually not, because in fact here with the Tanya, I think this cable is surprisingly nice. This is better than a lot of more expensive cables. You can see that it lies very flat. It's very well behaved. It's not memory prone. You see how straight it's going as I just lie it around and flop it around. So this is actually a surprisingly nice little cable. It might not look especially fancy, and it kind of just reminds me of like the cable that came on, what was it, the Kodungori brass, which honestly I love that cable. So maybe it shouldn't be a surprise that I think this cable is actually pretty nice. And then the earpieces themselves, you can see, are very, very small. Frankly, not a lot to the build. Very small cylinders, bullet style fit, and I'll show you how these things fit in my ears in a second. There is what appears to be some sort of venting on the back, but I don't know. Sound isolation on these things is not massively strong, but it's also not especially weak. It's not an open back IM or anything like that. But yeah, I think the aesthetic of this it's pretty decent. It's pretty bare bones and pretty simple, but you know, it's a $22 IM. So what do you expect? Now, I will take this moment to make one of my biggest complaints about this IM, and it is about the build quality. I think the construction, or the sort of again, the cable, the fit and stuff like that, that is all pretty well done. But unfortunately, there is a problem with my Tanya. I want to keep calling it the Hana. I think that's my problem. But there's a problem with my Tanya, and I've seen some other people in my Discord server that had a similar issue where as I'm removing this earphone, I have a tendency to, let's see if I can get it to happen in this one, or is it more? There you go. You can see that this thing just kind of falls apart in my hands, and so I have to be careful when I am handling the Tanya, because that keeps undoing itself, and it's sensitive enough to the point that as I'm just like swapping ear tips, and that's part of why I haven't swapped the ear tips, it will dislodge it. And then even sometimes when I pulled these things out of my ears, it's dislodged or kind of disconnected that little bit. So not very excited about that build quality. It seems like somebody forgot to glue it or something like that, and probably after this review I'll go ahead and glue it myself just so I don't have to worry about it anymore. But I will have to be pretty careful because it could be easy to accidentally get glue in a bad spot. So I'll show you, like I promised, what these things fit like. So they are a bullet style IM. You could ostensibly fit them like this, which is probably how most people would wear these things. It's just hanging down, and you can see very small inside my ear. And generally I find this fit very comfortable, some of the most comfortable fits. But I actually prefer to listen to the Tanya, as well as pretty much all bullet style IMs, over the ear. So you can still wrap the cable over your ear like this. It gives it a little bit of extra security, and it also prevents any microphonics from coming up the cable, right? So if this cable rubs up against my shirt or something like that, with some other IMs, it will have a tendency to transmit audio into the ear, especially if it's just hanging down. But if you have the cable wrapped around the ear, you can very often significantly dampen that effect. And so that's why I personally prefer to listen to them like this. Again, so it's that security and that improved microphonic performance, I suppose. So yeah, that is the general gist of the build quality of the Tanya. Again, I like the form factor of this a lot. A really nice cable. And I don't know, like a dab of glue would probably bring this to the point where I'd have zero complaints about it, but I do think that's a pretty serious warning to consider with the Tanyas, that it might fall apart on you. So, all right, let's talk about the sound signature here on the Tanya, which, you know, let's see, given my expectations with other Tanchjims, the Hana and the Darling are kind of like both different versions of slightly bassy neutral. You know, they've got some bass emphasis for sure, but I wouldn't call them bassy IMs really. The Tanya, however, this is a bit of a bass cannon. If you are looking for a bassy sound signature in a budget price, there's a lot of things in the budget price range that are bassy, but not a lot of them that I would recommend. I don't know, they can often either overdo it in the bass or just have some issues with the treble. And generally I think that this is just, you know, a bassy sound signature that I think will work for a lot of people. That bass does give it, you know, a bit of a warm tone, a bit of a thick kind of warm V-shaped signature, which again, for a lot of people, I think is going to be what they're looking for. So what I like about the sound signature, or the sound in general here on the Tanchjim Tanya, and there is some pretty nice stuff apart from just that bass quantity, is I think that the sound staging and the instrument separation and stuff is actually surprisingly well done here on the Tanya for a $22 IM. like honestly, it does a pretty solid job, especially given the fact that the bass is so dominant in the mix. You know, having a dominant bass in the mix can often come at the expense of that separation and that layering. But here with the Tanya, you still get it, which is actually pretty impressive. And maybe I shouldn't be too surprised, because that's what Tanchjim seems to excel at, is that imaging and that again, that 3D effect to the sound. And then while the mid-range on this does kind of get sacrificed for that big bass and clarity in the treble, I did find that the treble is still pretty present, but not irritating at all, right? So some other IEMs in this price range, let's take a look. Let's say something like the KZ ZSN Pro, right? That's like 20 bucks, and it's not bad. It's not a bad IEM for the price. But the treble can be a little bit fatiguing. And here with the Tanya, I would say that the treble is definitely as present as you need it to be, but it's not fatiguing. And in fact, there's actually a pretty decent amount of air here. Zero issues with sibilance, which is pretty impressive for a budget IEM. And so, yeah, I would say that those are the things that I like about the sound here on the Tanya. Now, what I don't love about the sound on the Tanya is honestly, like, and you probably saw this coming from my preferences, it's just too much bass. I know a lot of people are going to be pretty excited about how much bass you get here with the Tanya. For me, it's too much, and it's not the best bass either. Like I mentioned, it doesn't really like smear up the separation and the layering in the different sounds. It still does that pretty well. But I did find that the bass does kind of muddy up the mid-range, and the mid-range it really does get sacrificed for that bass and that soundstage presentation. And then the bass character too, it does have a bit of an odd quality. I found it's a little bit, I noted down, it's a little bit thuddy, a little bit, it's like, imagine like kicking a soccer ball that's underinflated, kind of like that sort of effect to it. It's not super bad again, and I've got, you know, the qualification that I'm recognizing this is a $2,200 or a $22 IEM, man. But yeah, I think the bass quality in here, it's again a lot of bass, and it's not terrible bass, but I don't think it's great bass. So that's kind of where I am on the sound here of the Tanchjim Tanya. Let me go ahead and bring in some other IEMs for comparison. And before I do that, let me move this stuff out of the way so we have ample room for slinging IEMs, right? It's a thing that people do. And those two IEMs, like I mentioned, are going to be the final E500 and the Moondrop Spaceship. And if you're looking for price ranges on these things, the final E500 I think costs 25 bucks, at least on Amazon right now, and I do have links in the description for all three of these. And then the Moondrop Spaceship, incredibly, is only 20 bucks. I don't know how they build these things for this cheap, but 22 bucks, 25 bucks, 22 bucks, or 20 bucks solid. But these are the IEMs. I'll start with the comparisons to the final E500, which is actually all worth noting. All three of these have pretty different sound signatures. So whatever your preferred sound signature is, there's a pretty good chance one of these is going to hit it. And the final E500, its sound signature is, I would describe as kind of like a warm, laid-back neutral, where this is kind of this warm V shape with big bass and some treble emphasis. This here, the final E500, is a lot more laid back. It's got a warm mid-range, which means that the vocals are not especially forward, but that the lower mid-range is still, you know, it's not like overly present. It's got this just kind of relaxed, laid-back tune that I find is just mid-range focused, I guess is maybe the best way to describe that. So this would be a bass focused IEM, this would be a mid-range focused IEM. The bass on the E500 is not bad. It's just a little bit on the mid-bassy side, not overly elevated, and it stays out of the way of the mid-range, but that it would be a pretty big difference between these two. Just in terms of tonality, I think that the final E500 definitely hits my preferences closer because it is that mid-range focus. It does come across, I think, an initial impression, the E500 is going to sound a little bit more dull versus the Tanchjim Tanya, but I think, at least from my perspective, the songs that I'm listening to and what I'm listening for in music, I think that the texture in vocals and just the overall detail perception in the mid-range is going to be stronger here on the E500, so I find it more satisfying because of that. Vocals are still pretty relaxed here on the E500, and I talked about the mid-range being a little bit distant here. That can come at the expense of vocals. These are not especially forward vocals, but I do think because that mid-range is more even, this just comes across with a better vocal presentation. The treble on the Tanya, I would say, is probably actually better extended. Despite the fact that it is so bass dominant, it actually has pretty nice treble extension, which just means you get a nice sense of air, and it contributes to that sense of space and stage, which I do think the Tanya does quite well. So between these two, I would say this is kind of the fun V-shaped sound signature if you like a lot of bass. The E500, again, kind of a relaxed, laid-back tune if you like mid-range, but I think probably the stronger of the two on detail. So now, the other comparison here is the Moondrop Spaceship. And where this one differs between the other two is, let's see, the E500 I would describe as sort of the mid-range focus. This is the bass focus. So that makes the Spaceship kind of the treble upper mid-range focused. This is a bit on the bright side, a little bit on the forward side. And you could describe this as a little bass light. I think probably bass levels are pretty similar to the E500, but depending on your listening volumes, this will sound a little bit less bassy than the E500. And honestly, in some ways, this is kind of like a mini SSR. And if you remember my review of the SSR, I love the Moondrop SSR. So having this kind of pocket $20 version with these really cute, these are all metal. I love the way this thing's built. I didn't talk about the build quality of the E500, but yeah, I love the way the Spaceship is built. And it's nice to have that for 20 bucks. Let's see, what other notes did I put here? I mean, this is a bit of a treble forward IM, but not especially sharp in the treble. So for my taste, like, I didn't have any issues with the brightness. Some people might take issue with it just being a little bit bright and a little bit thin sounding compared to the other two IMs here. But it does, I think, give it a nice sense of detail perception, especially in those higher frequencies, and a nice sense of stage. Kind of a different version of soundstage versus the Tanchjim Tanya. I would say they're maybe about similar in terms of staging, although I find the more open mid-range here just gives me that sense of breadth that I like for my sound signature, but both of these I would say outstage the E500. And then, yeah, I would say just imaging precision. If you're like gaming or something with IEMs, you might actually find that the brighter sound signature here on the Spaceship actually turns out to be the best. So that's kind of how I would describe these three different IEMs. I actually wanted to continue this pattern that I've been doing recently of ranking these different IEMs that I compare in different categories, and so that's what we'll do now. I think if you're just looking for the maximum amount of bass quantity, I would rank them like this, right? You've got the Tanya as the biggest, the most bass. The E500 and the Spaceship are maybe similar levels, but I would say the E500 has a little bit more bass, and then the Spaceship has the least amount of bass. Now, if you're talking about bass quality, which is kind of a different character or a different aspect, and I would define bass quality by like just being well defined and controlled, and having a good physicality to it. Honestly, I would probably reverse this order. So I would say that the Spaceship, to my ear, has the best bass. Again, if you're looking for a lot of bass, you'll probably be disappointed. But for what I like, I think that the Spaceship does the bass better. I think that the E500 does it pretty well too. And then here, again on the Tanya, I found the bass a little bit on the flabby, kind of bloated and soft side. Let's see, detail perception, maybe another category we could give. And I would actually probably leave them in the same order. I think in terms of detail perception, I think the Spaceship with its treble focus gives it kind of an unfair edge, but it definitely feels like it gives you the strongest sense of detail. The E500, I think the mid-range presentation on this gives you a nice texture through the vocals, and just a nice presentation overall without being very sharp. This gives you a little bit of extra edge to it, which again enhances that detail perception. And then the Tanya, honestly, it's not that bad because of the treble, the treble presence and that sense of air. It can actually give it a pretty decent sense of detail, but through the mid-range especially, I feel like the Tanya is kind of compromised. Let's see, if I'm rating these things based purely on tonality to my preferences, I would probably change them up like this. I'd probably say the E500 is my favorite tonally. It's it's just a nice mid-range focus, where this is not bad tonally, but I think this is definitely going to be a more polarizing tonality. It can be thin sounding. It can sound maybe a little bit shrill with vocals in some cases. Yeah, depending on how sensitive you are to that sort of thing. I would give this one with a warning, but for my preferences, I do still prefer the tuning of this to the tuning of the Tanya, which for me is just, it's too bass dominant. Again, if that's what you want, I'm trying to describe this in a way for you to make your own opinion, but this is how I would rank them in terms of their tonality. And then in terms of build quality, this is going to be the last ranking I give here. I'd actually say that the Spaceship has my favorite build quality because it's got these nice metal buds. The E500, it's really bare bones plastic build quality. It's fine. This cable, is, you can kind of see, it's never really lying flat, but it's a decent cable. And then I think the cable on the Tanya is actually phenomenal, but the fact that it falls apart means that I'm going to go ahead and leave that in last place when it comes to build quality. So that is a lot of talking about these three different IEMs, but I might as well go ahead and give them scores for you. And for that, I think I'll actually jump back to the table. For the Tanchjim Tanya, which is our first one. Should we do it that one first? Yeah, let's do the Tanchjim Tanya first. For the score in this one, I'm going to go ahead and give the Tanya, I think, 3 stars. I think, again, sound signature wise, this is not my preference. But if you're looking for a bassy IEM under 30 bucks, you could definitely do a lot worse. I think most IEMs that are not on this table are worse than the Tanya. So it's pretty decent there. And I might even give it 4 stars if it didn't fall apart on me, but it is kind of falling apart, and I think I got to factor that into the rating. The next one I will score is the Moondrop Spaceship, which, again, I love the build quality on this. Tonality, I think, is again, polarizing, so take this with a grain of salt, but I like it. And then I think that detail perception and that imaging is really pretty standout here on the Spaceship for the price range. So for this price range, I'd actually give the Spaceship a solid 4 stars. Again, it's got a bit of a caveat. Be careful. You might not love that tonality, but for me, I'm into it. And then the final IEM that I will rate on this table is going to be the final E500. I actually didn't leave that for final because it's final, but I guess that worked out. But out of 5 stars, I think for 25 bucks, I can't imagine doing better than this. So I'm going to go ahead and give this thing a very solid 5 stars out of 5. I think the final E500 for 25 bucks, basically you get a set of these final ear tips, which are some of my favorite ear tips, which you can pay, $15 for. You get a full set of those plus an earphone for another $10 extra. And I don't know, if you put it that way, it's kind of ridiculous. And I feel like everyone should buy a final E500. I actually like it better than the E1000 and even the E2000 that I have. And those are more expensive, as the numbers imply. But that is my review of the Tanchjim Tanya and my comparisons to the other IEMs. If you're interested in checking out any of these IEMs, of course, I've got links in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, ding the YouTube bell, and then I'll catch you on the next super review. And if you're here live, hang out and let's have a conversation. All right, folks, I'm gonna try something different today. Normally I look over here at my computer screen where I've got the live chat going on, but I wanna try and see if I can get the live chat on my iPad down here. So let's see if this works out. And it does actually seem to be working out. Okay, so I'm gonna try. I don't know if this is any better for you, but it's a little bit better for me. So let me catch up with live chat as best as possible. We'll start with the obligatory shout outs. DNT Arc, of course. Joshi, Zaid, Paul, welcome. Thanks for joining early and keeping me company while I was doing sort of some initial setup stuff. And of course, the dab for DNT Arc. Ishan, how's it going? David Oberhart, nice to see you there. Big Boss, always good to see you as well. And Big Boss, I believe you've also got a Tanchjim Tanya. Maybe I'll scroll to it and you've already shared your opinion, but I'm pretty sure you're actually one of the fans of the Tanya. So would be interested to get your take on it here in the video. Link saying just bought the Sony NWA55. Thanks for your rec. I love it. Yeah, so that is a digital audio player. It's around 200 bucks and probably still would be the one. I mean, I have the A45. The A55 is a slightly newer version. I have used it a little bit because my friend has it. But yeah, I have not found a sub $200. I haven't even found a sub $300 digital audio player that I like more than those. The NWA 105, which is the Android-based version, that price is starting to come down. I think I saw it for like 250 bucks now, and that's going to be kind of hard to beat. But with the A55, you definitely get better battery life for sure. DNTRK asking, so no more #1 KZ fan? I don't know that I was ever the #1 KZ fan, but I wore the shirt and I still have the shirt for all the #1 KZ fans out there. And if you want a #1 KZ fan t-shirt, link in the description down below to my merch store. And Big Boss, no, I don't think the final E500 is better than the 64 Audio Trio. Although it's probably closer than you would guess, given you're comparing a $25 IM versus a literal $3,000 IM. Joe S. saying Tanchjim is how I keep thinking it's pronounced. I'm not sure actually how to pronounce it. I had asked a representative at Shenzhen Audio how to pronounce Tanchjim, or maybe, yeah, I think it was. And they had suggested like Tanchjim or something like that. I don't know. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. Tanchjim. I'm just going to go ahead and pronounce it as literally as possible, and probably incorrectly. And if Tanchjim wants to reach out and tell me how to pronounce it, I would gladly take that advice. Paul, you're saying your cat's name is Tanya. Well, good thing cats don't respond to their names. Otherwise, I'd be freaking your cat out right now, right? At least I've never had a cat that responded to its name. They always respond to kitty and... Big Boss, you're actually asking, is the cat responding to my name? The answer is probably no. JCap, how's it going? You get a dab too. That's right, I don't discriminate. Anyone gets a dab. Silver Persian cat. Love the detail. Oh, interesting, Big Boss. So I mentioned that Big Boss, who is an active member in the Discord community, mentioned that they've also got the Tanchjim Tanya. Big Boss said that they've got the version with the microphone on it, and mentioned that it doesn't actually work that well wearing over ear. So I demonstrated that I like to wear these things over ear. And Big Boss mentioned that wearing them like this with the microphone puts the microphone kind of right up here, which might be a little bit annoying. And I can understand how that might be annoying and might prevent you from wanting to wear the IM that way. Nick the Chopper, how's it going? Smells like live review and budget. That's right. Welcome back, Nick. Nice to see you again. DNTRX saying, I can confirm bass in budget hell is a little bit of a wild card. It can be make or break an IM. I mean, I think there's a lot of bassy budget IMs. I mean, definitely the bass quality varies all over the place, as we kind of talked about here with even these 3 IMs. But I find the biggest make or break in, I guess maybe most IMs, but especially in the budget space, is the treble. Treble's tough to do, and maybe I'm just a treble snob, but treble is where, that's where make or break usually happens for me. Here and asking, should I burn my Blonde BL03? So, my opinion, no. I like the Blonde BL03 quite a bit. I don't listen to it very often. It is kind of like the Tanchjim. It's bassier than I like. It's a little bit warmer, but I think the Blonde does it better for my tastes than the Tanya. It is more expensive than the Tanya as well. That's why it's not here in this comparison. But yeah, I think I would take the BL03 over the Tanya, and it would be a tough comparison for the other two though. I think I might take the final E500. Omar with an interesting question. Can I compare it to the Sony MH755, which I don't have here on this table for a number of reasons. One, it's hard to buy. It's like it was a free pack-in IEM with some Sony phones and some other Sony MP3s and stuff, like MP3 players. The other thing is that it comes with a cable that basically makes it useless unless you replace the cable, which I have done. I actually have an MH755. Got a problem with numbers today, but I have an MH755 with a swapped out cable. And I would say the 755, I think is better than the Tanchjim. It's also a very bassy sound signature, and again, bassier than I like. But I feel like it's a little bit stronger on clarity and less on the mud, where the Tanchjim bass, it does intrude quite a bit into the mid-range, and it gives it a bit of that bloated character. I feel like the MH755 avoids that. So I'd say I like the sound of the 755 better, but that's a really hard one to recommend because there's so many fakes out there. There's no official, like, anyone was selling it. Like, there was just people selling units they had gotten in bulk somehow on eBay. But yeah. Is Diro Lara saying, I'm getting the new Sony headphones because it carries the LDAC Bluetooth codec since my whole Plex library is FLAC. So I'm curious if you're talking about the newly released WF-1000 XM4s, which I unboxed on this channel last week, and I will be reviewing maybe later this week. We'll see how things go. Or if you're referring to like their over-ear headphones. I think the XM4s, they support LDAC. And I'll give you a spoiler right now. With EQ, I like them. Without EQ, I've got some quibbles. But with EQ, I think they're pretty solid. Precog, how's it going? You're saying Tanya is nice. I know you were over here this weekend listening to the Tanya. If you're not familiar with Precog, he's another IM reviewer. Got a really good thread on HeadFi, as well as contributes to Headphones.com's YouTube channel. He was over this weekend listening to the Tanya, and he liked it so much that he ordered it on the spot from Amazon just to kind of throw out an alternate opinion, right? I said that of these three, the Tanya is my least favorite. I give it 3 stars out of 5 and not my favorite tune, but I don't love a lot of bass. I know a lot of people out there like bass more than I do. Precog, I think, is one of those folks. So just to give you an alternate opinion, Precog likes it quite a bit. Devara asking, can they be recabled? I mean, anything can be recabled if you're inventive enough and you have enough patience. I don't know if you've ever tried soldering on like MMCX connectors or 2-pin connectors. They're just so small that if you're really good at soldering, you could definitely do it. But I wouldn't buy one of these with the expectation that that's going to be a successful operation. Buy it for $22. Maybe you'll ruin it. And maybe you'll be out $22, and maybe you'll get a recabled IM at the other end of it. But they're definitely not made for it. Let's see. Let's take a look. Let me move some stuff out of the way on my table, and you can see me right here looking at myself like a goof. But let's take a look at how these things may or may not be recableable. The Tanya, it's got a fairly large strain relief right here, which you could remove, and you could probably route a larger cable through that. So that seems to be on the scale of recableability. I would say that's a possible. Here on the final, however, you can see it's a very small, narrow cable that goes into a pretty small, narrow plastic hole. I would say that would be harder to recable. Again, I haven't actually tried this, but just based on that, you'd probably have to drill out that hole and make it larger. And then finally, the Moondrop Spaceship, it's also got a fairly large strain relief here, which if you remove that, again, I think that hole would be pretty large and you'd be able to fit maybe an MMCX connector in there, although it's probably going to poke out the bottom of this, so you would have to come up with some sort of housing to hold that MMCX connector, or maybe just a lot of glue or something like that. It wouldn't be the prettiest, but I think it would be possible. So I would say that the Tanchjim, kind of possible, or I'd say possible on the Tanchjim. It'd be pretty difficult on the final, and then on the spaceship, it would be possible, but probably ugly. But I'm not a modder, just so take that feedback with a grain of salt. Martine Ferrer saying, talking about the Moondrop SSR, I've been using them and I really love the sound when I use a PC, but when I use them on my phone, the volume is not enough. What can I do? So that's a really good question. The Moondrop SSR falls into a category of IMs that is hard to drive, which just means it needs more power to get loud. And depending on how loud you like to listen to your earphones, it's possible that your phone just is not going to be able to put out enough power for something like the Moondrop SSR. Compared to like an over-ear headphone, it's not hard to drive, but compared to other IMs, it can definitely be on the harder side. I think for the volumes that I listen at personally, an Apple dongle, like a $9 USB-C Apple dongle, will get them plenty loud for me. It's possible you listen louder and that won't be enough, but I think that should be fine. But if you really need it to be louder, you'd probably have to get an external DAC amp, something like an X-Duo X2 Pro, an iFi hip DAC, or something like that. Sai, how's it going? Nice to see you here as well. Another fellow Discord resident. Transient Snail, another Discord resident, saying the Moondrop Bullet IM also looks very interesting, rumored to be only $10. And I have not heard about that. If Moondrop is going to be releasing a new Bullet and this it's cheaper than the spaceship, interesting. I don't know how they make these IMs for $20. I really don't. Like, it's got decent sound. I'd say more than decent sound. I'd say these things sound pretty solid. It's got nice build quality, and it's only $20. How do you do that? I don't get it. Big Boss, I like to see you guessing the scores there, and I like that I surprised you a little bit. Yeah, the final E500 is my 5-star. The spaceship I'll give 4 stars, and the Tanya I give 3 stars, which could be 4 stars, but it's a bit too much bass and it falls apart. Frieza saying, oh dang, I missed both reviews. That's all right. There's a rewind button. You can always check it out, but I'm glad you're here live when we can chat a little bit. Sai's asking, do I think the Tanchjim Tanya holds its competition against KZ Blondes and the Tins? So I mentioned, the only KZ I've mentioned so far today is the KZ ZSN Pro, which I think costs like $18. It's even cheaper than these, and it has a removable cable, so if that's important to you, that's an option that does that. Sound signature on the ZSN Pro is honestly also not that bad, although it has been probably maybe 2 years since I've listened to it, so maybe my memory is not that great. How I would rank, I would probably rate the ZSN Pro below all of these in terms of sound signature, just based on the treble quality as I remember it. I remember having some issues with the treble quality on the ZSN Pro, which, you know, again, it's a sub $20 IM, so where do you set your expectations? But given the fact that these 3 exist, and these all 3 have, I think, untroublesome treble, it's hard for me to recommend something like the ZSN at this point, unless again you need that removable cable. Now versus the Blondes, I would pick the Blondes over the Tanya, and I would probably pick the other 2 over the Blonde BL03, even though the BL03 is more expensive. Again, that's gonna be a really personal taste sort of thing. If you're looking for a bassy IM, the Blonde BL03 is a very solid set, and I don't have a lot of complaints about it, apart from the fact that it's just a little bit more bassy than I like. And then the tins, let's say the Tin Hi-Fi T2. Ooh, I would probably put the Tin Hi-Fi T2 maybe above the Spaceship, but I might pick the E500 over it. That's tough. That's tough. And I'll give this all the caveat that I haven't listened to those other IEMs in a while. These three that you see on the table, these are the three that I spent this past couple of weeks listening to head to head. Those other three, that's just all based on memory. Poop. Hello, Mr. Review. Nice to see you again, Poop. I feel like I see you every morning. Nameb, nice to see you as well. Not Daijobu. One of these days I'm going to meet Daijobu, but not Daijobu. It's you're saying you're going to get them soon. You're going to get your own Tanya soon. You're also a Discord resident, so I'm looking forward to your impressions there. Southwest Kitty, how's it going? Nice, thanks for the wave. And Big Boss's impression of the Tanya. My first impression with the Tanya was that the instrument separation was an obvious standout. Tonality didn't seem to bother me that much in the context of looking for an Azul alternative. So there you go, there's another take on the Tanya. This is like freaking Amazon reviews over here. Gary Chan, thank you for this intel. I'm going to go ahead and screenshot this so I can take a look at it later. You're saying that Tanchjim's Chinese name is Tanchjim. Did I get that anywhere close to right? Probably not, but maybe that will give me some clues into how I should be pronouncing it in the future. Martin Ferrero, how many stars do cats get? Cats get 9 stars, obviously. I love cats. Frank Clark saying I should get into ASMR. I gotta be honest, ASMR kind of freaks me out. I don't know anything about it. Should I be freaked out by it? Or is it perfectly normal? Someone update me. What's going on? Nightquaker, nice to see you as well. Mitch Marzine saying, "Hey Micromatic, what's up? Great reviews. All kidding aside, this some guy MTO3. Yeah, Micromatic. Thanks. If you're a former Micromatic watcher, welcome to Super Review." We were actually just talking. So again, if you're interested, I've got the link to my Discord server in the description down below. We actually now have a photography channel where we can talk about photography and cameras and stuff like that. I haven't been as active with photography as I used to be, so hence Micromatic is effectively dead at this point. But if you want to talk shop about camera stuff, and I'm always down to talk about Micro Four Thirds, which I'm shooting on Micro Four Thirds right now, join the Discord. Sarpashi saying, "Sorry for being late." You don't gotta apologize to me. That's fine. Thanks for joining anytime. Non asking, does an inline mic affect the sound quality? Which I think is an interesting question. I've never done any A/B testing of two of the same IEM, one with a microphone and one without. My honest expectation is that it's very unlikely that a microphone will impact the sound quality. I mean, I think it's very possible if something was wired incorrectly, but I think it's very unlikely that a finished product that you get delivered to your doorstep will have any issues with the sound quality that are introduced by the microphone. I wouldn't be worried about that myself. I personally don't like microphones on my cables more just because I like to wind up my cables. You see how I do that all the time. And having a microphone just adds like a little bit of extra obstruction in there that makes the wind not as tight and not as nice. Sarapashi asking, the Moondrop SSR bass vent hacks, is it worth the effort, and what are the compromises? So for those who aren't familiar with it, the Moondrop SSR, right? An IEM I reviewed about a year ago, and I still love that IEM. In fact, I still listen to it every once in a while, just randomly. It's not a very bassy IEM, however, and it's because of that, it's a tune that I can't recommend to people blindly. Like, I have to give them the caveat that it's kind of a bright forward tune and you might not like it if you want a lot of bass, but there is a hack. If you cover up one of the vents on the nozzle, you go from bass light IM to straight up gigabass. And if you want to see the effect of this, I actually have it graphed on Squig Link. So squig.link is the URL. And if you look up Moondrop SSR, looking under the variants, I've got a variant of that measurement with the vent blocked. And you can see how the bass just goes from here to boom. It's like the bass that basically does this sort of thing. Like the bass is dabbing and like just tons of bass up here. So yeah, if you want a bassy IM, you can make the SSR a bassy IM. Now, you ask the question, why wouldn't you do it, right? What are the trade-offs? Well, one, it's a lot of bass. Like it's bassier than any other IM I have. It's that bassy. So if you want that amount of bass, maybe there's no trade-offs. For me, it's way too much bass. It doesn't sound good in my opinion, but I don't know, maybe that's what you're looking for. I would say it probably comes at the expense, and I haven't spent a lot of time listening to it, if I'm perfectly honest, but it probably comes at the expense of the clarity. It's going to come at the expense of the definition between sounds, but not entirely. Like, that stuff's still there. It's still a Moondrop SSR. It's just way too bassy for me. But it's a very reversible modification, so if you want to try it out, you can use a piece of tape over the vent. I use blue tack. But yeah, very reversible. Carlos saying, I'm thinking about picking up the final E500s since they seem to be good for soundstage and for gaming. Their frequency curve seems to be what I like, but I'll EQ them anyway. Yeah, the final E500 for gaming, interesting. It's not a very bright IM. At least I don't find it very bright. I would say that the Spaceship, and I haven't used any of these for gaming because just perfectly frankly, I do play some games, but mostly I play fighting games, and if I play a first-person shooter, I play on COS KPH 30Is, not on IEMs. So take this with a grain of salt. I would expect that of these three, the Spaceships would be the best for gaming, in the sense of what people seem to be looking for in IEMs when they say, I want an IEM for gaming. Gary Chan's, and surprisingly, I actually said his Chinese name perfectly. Okay, I'm gonna have to go back and rewind that and see how I said it, because there's a good chance I can't repeat that. But appreciate the coaching. Corey saying, have I reviewed the Jade Audio EA101? No, I haven't. I actually haven't heard anything from Jade Audio, and I believe they are sort of a subsidiary or a sister brand of FiO, but I haven't heard any of their stuff. And Gary Chan, you're saying that the Tanchjim name literally means Angel Jimmy. Interesting. Huh. Is there any significance to Jimmy? Like, is it just like the Western name Jimmy? George Aguila, what's up, man? How's it going? Hope you're doing well. Nice to see you in the live stream as well. Big Boss answering the question about mic cables, saying, I've used aftermarket mic cables with several IEMs and have never noticed a difference. Haven't done A/B testing, but I think any difference that does exist isn't worth testing. That's how I feel about a microphone. I think a microphone in your cable is introducing a potential other point of failure. So like, in a sense, like I could see that as somewhat of a trade-off, but it's just such a small potential, in my opinion, that I wouldn't worry about it too much. And Devara saying, if you want a bassier SSR, why not just go SSP? And I think that's a good recommendation. You can also tape up the vent on the SSP and get the same effect. But yeah, I would, I think that the SSP is a much better balance of bass than a taped up SSR. And Sorrel asking SSP versus Tanya. I would probably pick the SSP. But again, I didn't do that head-to-head comparison, but I think I would probably pick the SSP over the Tanya. The Tanya might actually give you a bigger soundstage because, as I recall, the SSP, it sacrificed some of that imaging and layering depth that the SSR does really well for that bass, where the Tanchjim actually gives you a pretty wide stage while still being pretty bassy. So you might get that better, but I don't know. I would probably pick the SSP. Diogo Santos saying, don't know if anyone's asked this, but I'd love to know more about you, your education, interesting things about you. We always talk about IEMs, but not the person behind the reviews. That could be a long video or a very short one because I'm not great at talking about myself. But honestly, my recommendation would be just join the Discord chat. We talk a lot about IEMs, but we also talk about a lot of other things. And like recently I've been posting, videos of me hiking in the area. Talk about photography, talk about whatever we want. And I think that would be a really good place to have that kind of conversation. I don't know. I don't feel like I'm that interesting. So maybe I would need more specific questions. Big Boss and Albert Cheebs. So Big Boss, you're saying that you prefer Jimmy to Michael amongst the angels, and then Cheebs, you're agreeing that Jimmy is the best angel. Yeah. Bricks Jasper, how's the Tanchjim compared to the Moondrop spaceship? Well, I recommend you review this or rewind this video, because that's what this video was all about, was comparing about those three IEMs, or these three IEMs, which include the Tanya as well as the spaceship. And just to demonstrate it, here they are all on camera, as well as my goofy face again. All three of these IEMs were compared in this video. If you're joining here late, rewind if you can get all the detail on what I think about those three. Oh, Diogo, you are in the Discord chat. Well, ask there. And Sai asking, well, I think I'll make this final question here. Moondrop Aria or final E500? So the Moondrop Aria, I think it's an $80 IEM, single dynamic driver. Like all three of these are single dynamic drivers. Kind of a warm bassy IEM. Honestly, and I didn't do this head-to-head comparison, so again, this is off the top of my head based on memory. I would probably pick the final E500 just purely on sound. I think there's a lot of benefits to the Aria in terms of build quality and fit. Like, it's a nicer feeling IEM for sure. But I would probably pick the E500, honestly. But yeah, I think that will do it for this live stream. I want to shout out and thank you all for joining and having a conversation with me. It makes these things a lot more interesting than me just sitting here looking at myself. If you weren't here, this would just be really sad. But you're all here having a conversation, and I really appreciate it. If you want more conversation, like I mentioned before, check out the link to my Discord down below. While you're down there, you can hit the like button for this video. You can click a link to Amazon if you want to check out any of these IEMs. But otherwise, have a good week, and I'll catch you on the next Super Review. Cheers.